Hey folks, welcome to another live stream. It's really good. I'm glad these live streams have been doing well, so I'm going to keep doing them for as long as I can. Listen, today I wanted to talk about something. So there's a great YouTube channel I recommend. If you haven't checked it out, it's called Veritasium. They have, I don't know, 10 million plus subscribers, so probably most of you have heard of it. It's really cool. And they have a video out today. About 5 6 years ago, he sort of went mainstream and he got lots of animation support and so on. So it's a really well done video that they've released today on the history of forever chemicals, how they're still in the water, how they're in all of our bloodstream, et cetera, et cetera. So just to sort of briefly sum up that video, this was the attempts to sort of create um, certain kinds of safe and stable environments to make something non-stick. But it wasn't really about non-stick in the beginning. It was about nuclear experimentation and how to contain nuclear experiments in a safe space. They had to invent something called Teflon. In order to invent Teflon, you had to invent this thing called PFAS, these fluoride chemicals, and they can be deadly in certain doses. They can absolutely be deadly, and it's really a great video. I can't recommend it. You got to go check it out. But my takeaway is this: my takeaway is these are things that are on every continent, including Antarctica. These are things that just were not in the environment, even 100 years ago, let alone 1,000 years ago, let alone 10,000 years ago, let alone 350,000 years ago, which is when humans were actually evolving, right? So when we talk about what is the appropriate climate, what is the appropriate environment for a human, whatever it is, it didn't include those things. Just like it didn't include microplastics, just like it didn't include a lot of other things that are now contaminants in the system. But so that's one takeaway. But another takeaway is there isn't a whole lot we can do about it, right? There isn't a whole lot we can do about it, except the things that we always recommend. Don't eat ultra processed foods. There were certain foods in that video that did really badly, like microwaved popcorn. But again, if you're following me, hopefully you're not eating that. Hopefully you're not eating popcorn in general. But if you are, certainly don't microwave it, right? These are sort of obvious things. So they're obvious takeaways, but you're never going to reduce your exposure to zero because that's the environment that we're living in. So, and you can say the same thing with the microplastics. I was doing a bit of a deep dive just for my own interest in the history of microplastics and where they end up and so on and so forth, and the relationship with certain hormones, estrogen and testosterone and so on. And these are important questions, but so far, I mean, from what I can tell, looking at the data, they're largely unanswered questions, right? Are these things safe in very, very, very small quantities? Probably. Are they safe at every dosage? Absolutely not, right? So that said, what can we do? And I think this really just the things that are in our control, we need to double down on them, right? The things that we can actually do safely, confidently. What do I mean by that? I mean, it's a lot of this is going to come down to food. If you can buy your food without plastic, of any kind, that's great. Certainly, if you can buy your food without those kind of, that kind of Teflon surface, that sort of non-stick coating stuff that's found in lots of things, that's great. If you can buy food that's not in disposable containers like paper cups and so on, that's great. So there's certain things we can do there. But even for the things, I guess what I'm trying to say is, some of those things may have been safe when we were growing up. When I was growing up in the 1980s, these things weren't so common. But now giving them to our children the same way that we got them, or sorry, the junk food was common. Like, so the packaged food where I was growing up in the US, the Oreo cookies, the McDonald's burgers, whatever, those were totally fine. But the McDonald's burger was coated in regular paper. Like when I bought it, it was like literally a little paper thing that you could tear. Now you can't tear it because it has that Teflon coating on it, right? This thing. I'm told. Not that I buy fast food often, but I do. From time to time on the road, I guess I have in the past couple of years, and you see that it's weird. The packaging is very odd, right? So if you can avoid those things, great. But where you can, so I guess what I'm saying is you have to be even more disciplined. You have to be even more religious when it comes to yourself and when it comes to your children than we were a few years ago. So people sometimes tell me, what's the harm in a donut? What's the harm in this? And to be honest, I don't know. I mean, I don't have evidence that a specific food at a specific dosage is going to cause a specific amount of harm. I don't have that kind of evidence. But it's just a precautionary principle. If we can avoid those things at all costs, whatever we can avoid, we must avoid. Why? Because at a certain dosage, this becomes toxic. And again, I can't say if you're eating McDonald's every day, if you're having those burgers wrapped in that plastic every day, is it toxic? I don't know. Nobody knows. But at some dosage, it is going to become toxic, right? In the video, they were very powerful. There's a very powerful scene where a guy's farm gets contaminated and he loses all of his cows. I mean, it's really horrific what you see happening to those animals, right? So we don't want to, and it's functions because it looks like fats, and they end up in our liver, and so on and so forth. And again, we all have these to some extent. So scary stuff. I would say, of course, don't panic. I'm not trying to spread fear, and that video is not about spreading fear either. And there's certainly there probably are higher priorities, like getting rid of the sugar in the diet and so on. But it's complementary, right? So if you're going to get rid of the sugar but still have a lot of these plastics, is that going to be helpful or harmful? I don't know. Can't say. But it's the precautionary principle. If something wasn't around 1,000 years ago or even 100 years ago, better to avoid it, right? And in order to use that precautionary principle to the maximum, we say, look, try and eat the foods that are appropriate for humans, which are the foods that humans evolved on, which are largely, 70, 80% going to be animal foods, and maybe the remaining 15 to 30%, whatever you want to do. You could do some starchy root veg if you wanted to. You could do some non-starchy veg if you want to, if you're trying to lose weight, if you're trying to be in ketosis, etc. I'm a little bit less dogmatic as long as you're falling within the sort of hyper carnivore definition of what it is to be human. What makes up the rest of the diet, I think, to me, is less important. Makes sense? But eating some kind of an ancestral diet, meaning looking at the foods that humans evolved to eat 100,000 years ago or more, that's a super important starting point. And I think it's even more important than ever, given that we're living in these environments which are toxic in ways that we don't understand. I mean, that's really the takeaway that I'm getting from that video and so many others. We do not, and so much other data, we do not understand the extent to which our environment is poisoning us. Okay? So, food for thought. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next one.